chapters. If you've been in your Christian life for a while, there might not be a whole lot of brand new information you've never read from another source, gone through if you've been discipled before, if maybe you've gone through material like this. So to you might be further along in your discipleship journey than other people. When you're teaching a class, you kind of aim, you got to take aim. And so if you aim too high, you really kind of miss the people who might need it the most. You aim too low and you don't really stimulate the ones who are further along. But the point of discipleship is the ones that are further along, you're going to be on the front lines of being in that discipleship process with other people. You're already outfitted. You're already closer to that spiritual maturity where you have a concern for the lost, concern for your neighbors, concern for young Christians, and you come alongside them. And so hopefully something here for you today, but definitely this material is for maybe someone's first venture into discipleship. And so what I'm going to do, I took my just personal notes, things that jumped out at me in each chapter. I'm just going to kind of summarize some of those big ideas. I'm going to sit down and then we're just going to discuss. Okay, that's if you had notes, if you had something to share, something in particular that stood out to you as being helpful and encouraging, we're just going to spend a little time sharing, and once that dries up, we'll finish up, okay? Have some more goodies, and then call it a night, okay? So, if you would, per couple, if you don't mind, just sharing one.
These are your notes?
Yeah, these are just some of my notes. You might, again, have your own, and I'll give you the opportunity to share. I want to go through the ones that I took. Because if you weren't able to finish, I want to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page. So I'll let that get handed out. And I've got a printed email on the back of one of those sheets. Anybody got a printed email? No? Okay, cool. Oh, it's right here. Okay. So, a couple of slides. Now, this topic of discipleship is something that I was really challenged on at the Pastor's Toolbox this last year. They brought in some special speakers who talked on discipleship, people from the Church of Mentor, talking about what they're doing with discipleship, and also this real-life discipleship information, some of these materials. People were talking about these materials, and it kind of began to whet my appetite, began to read some of the books that were recommended. And I have now, since that time in the WFBC, for our annual meeting, the whole topic was discipleship. And I found there's about 20 to 25 different pastors in our fellowship that are all building, some of them since 2019, some of the systems, some of the process, some of the mentality. It's not a program, but some of the mentality of discipleship, they're growing that in their church, and they're seeing great results. So they're a couple of years ahead of us, a few years ahead of us, but I've really liked what I've heard. I'm hoping to go to a conference here next year about developing discipleship in our local churches. These slides came from the annual meeting message that was given. And so I wanted to share these because it's right along the lines of what I hope to be talking about in this program, not a program during this meeting. Living in a Great Commission, oftentimes, unfortunately, it's kind of without much of a plan or agenda. Once a person comes to faith, they are baptized, they follow the Lord, and then we kind of plug them into church in some capacity, and we kind of expect the church to be the incubator, and that is going to grow the person. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it really doesn't, because people need more of an individual approach versus maybe a corporate approach. And so where the second slide of baptism is the beginning, that's infancy, everything from that point is what we're charged to do, teaching obedience to all of Christ's commands. That is where we as the church get involved corporately, but then also one-on-one discipleship. If you turn the page, in the back of that page, it pulls out some information, the difference between program and relationship. And again, this isn't going to be rocket surgery, brain science, brain surgery, brain rocket science. But we understand programs, oftentimes churches have an abundance of programs. Programs start, programs stop. Sometimes programs are just limping along and they're just made to survive. You lose somebody, we need a hot body to put back into that program, even if they're not a good fit for it, even if they're not particularly interested in it. We need that program to survive. Relationally, trying to develop a closeness with individuals. I know because we have believers here that have done this, you know the difference between having a Sunday school and having a one-on-one disciple, somebody who you're actually training up. It's quite different. And I'm not trying to value one over the other. I want to make sure that we're doing both, that we have a system in mind that it's not just in our Sunday school corporate environment, but it's also we're comfortable taking a friend, a coworker, somebody who might never come into church at where they're at at that day, but we can begin that process with them. So this is just to kind of challenge us, some of our thinking outside of the kind of church culture that we've grown up in. People have a really hard time with this. Sometimes it's very unnatural for them to do ministry outside of the church. It's hard to do ministry inside their home. It's very awkward to expect to meet people in the community, or maybe even do a Bible study in somebody else's home. And that's what I'm saying. We can broaden our vision for what discipleship can look like. Down here, this triangle, why I like this is look at where we get 90% of our active retention. You retain more when you're going to be teaching. Okay, and so if you are in a church setting and all you're hearing is lecture, or maybe let's say you're doing church, but then it's also you're reading on your own, how much are you getting versus, and that's really passive learning in many respects. Reading is less passive, but just coming and going to Sunday school and coming and hear messages is relatively passive. Some people can sleep right through it. If you're teaching somebody, you can't sleep through it. You have to be active. If you're sleeping through what you're teaching, you should find something else to do. Here's the point. When you're a discipler, you're teaching people, so you're going to want to know the answers to the questions. You're going to go into the Word if they ask a question. You go, that's a great question. I've never really studied that out. Let me go check this out. You go do that. You're going to take that and really learn it well because you're going to communicate it to somebody else. Okay, so it really makes your learning process deepen when you have an intended target, a disciple in mind. So I'm going to give you guys a chance. Again, let me just go through these few notes just to highlight some of the things that I pulled out. From chapter 1, chapter 1 really talked about a high school coach versus a college coach. Why is a high school coach maybe not as successful as a college coach? really it comes down to high school coaches can be very successful. It's how they develop their players. College is able to recruit. They're able to pull people. A high school coach that has a repeatable process, who builds leaders, who takes what they are given and they build with that. Those kinds of coaches build really great teams. And so referring to church, I can't be the only disciple maker, and I don't feel like I am in this church. But what is our church philosophy towards discipleship? So let me pause right there. Let me ask you, do we have a discipleship philosophy in our church? Could we say we have a concern about it, but do we have something that's uniform and people know when it comes to discipleship?
I don't think we do as a church, but I think we do as some individuals.
Absolutely. And depending on where you're at in your spiritual walk. Speaking about church language, what do we say? What do we communicate? What do we all know that's being said? Having uniformity in our language is important. And so, disciple making is something that I really want us to begin talking more about. And outside of our typical Sunday school and our kids programming, what we want to do is let every single person feel a level of responsibility for the gift that God has placed in them, to use that gift for the body of Christ, to use that for the edification of the saints. And so, part of what I need to do as a pastor is get people using their spiritual gifts. What people have to do is understand how important their spiritual gift is into the corporate body. This all plays into discipleship. And so I want to start, and the idea is to start with y'all. Start with this group, offer this kind of teaching again, move forward and really people who I can say, hey, we've got this new couple, they've been coming, they're interested in having a Bible study. Who's ready to lead something like that? I would love to be able to have people who are part of our church, vetted, experienced, and confident to be able to do that.
Yeah. Pastor, one thing I want to say that I'm really proud of this church about, that this church is really good at, is when a new person comes into this church.
Welcoming.
This church is fantastic about welcoming them, going over, shaking their hand, saying hi, how you doing? Unfortunately, you can't get to everybody every week, but it's something I don't say I'm proud of. Is that okay? Can you say, is that okay to be proud of something?
It's a hard church to slip out of. It's a really hard church to slip out of. Yeah.
In fact, I gotta say, last night we went home, there was still lots of cars in the parking lot. We went by Calvary, bone dry, nothing there. I know maybe the Packers were on last night, I'm not sure. But
they actually were, yeah. Well, that was during the day though. Megan was there. All right, so we are God's plan A. There's no parachurch organization that should do what the local church does, okay? We are not plan B, we are not plan C, we are plan A. God has a plan for us individually to reach people. What often is the mentality in a lot of our churches is, I'll invite my friend, hopefully they'll hear a convicting message and they'll be responsive. Versus, you see that person every day at work. You see that person in your private life. They're friends with you. You already have a lot of warm door with them. Bringing that person to church is unfortunately very unlikely, depending on where they're at. But you are the church going out to them, being confident in that. And that's what I want to help grow, is confidence in that. So what is a disciple? I don't know if you brought your a Bible, and that's fine if you didn't. I'm going to be in 2 Corinthians really quick. 2 Corinthians 5. If you have your book, it's page 32 as a reference. Chapter 5, 2 Corinthians 5:15. Let me read these. This is speaking about our responsibility. Okay. And that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. Wherefore, henceforth, now, know we no man after the flesh, yea, though we have known Christ after the flesh, yet now henceforth know we him no more. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. And all things are of God, who hath reconciled us to himself by Jesus Christ, and hath given us the ministry of reconciliation. So, what is our given ministry? Well, Jesus reconciled us to God. Now we reconcile sinners to Jesus. And so it says, to wit, that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not imputing their trespasses against them, and hath committed unto us the word of reconciliation. So the same reconciliation that brought us into that faith, we're called to give that same message. Now, then we are ambassadors, is what it says, for Christ. And though God did beseech you by us, we pray you in God's stead, be ye reconciled to God. We all know what an ambassador is, represents the interests of a kingdom. If you're in a foreign land, you're representing your own kingdom in that foreign land. A disciple, though, speaking on page 32, he really made it simple. Follow me as somebody who knows Jesus and is following him, and I will make you. Jesus is the one who's changing the individual. Fishers of men is that now you're called to do something. In this case with the apostles is they're going to go fishing. So that is the head, that's knowing Jesus, that's the heart. Jesus is changing the individual, and the hands is disciples who are engaged in making new disciples. Chapter 3. I think one of the reasons why small groups kind of blow up sometimes in a negative, sometimes they blow up in a great positive, and there's many people who don't go to church, invited to a small group, invited to a Bible study. They start understanding things of God. Maybe they get saved. They start coming to a local church. This is a beautiful thing. One of the issues, though, with small groups is that sometimes churches will allow people to teach small groups, but they haven't evaluated the right people. They haven't vetted them correctly. Basically, they have not discerned where that person is in their journey, what their proximity is into the Lord, and they kind of place hands early on somebody who's not quite mature enough to lead. And so that kind of ends up, unfortunately, blowing up.
Can I give an example of that?
Yeah, sure.
Back in Washington, we had our church was really growing, and we started what we call growth groups. And we had a curriculum to follow and stuff. And I led one, and there was a guy named Dave Hofecker who led the other one. And there's about not this many people in each group. But one thing we learned is that the person who leads the group has to be fiercely loyal to the pastor and the church. Because the other group, they got together and they started not discipling, they started getting together and started criticizing the way the church was going. And I'd say after 2 years, probably 80% of the people in that group were gone. Mm-hmm. They were gone.
Unfortunately, it does happen. So part of this is really discerning, where's a person at? And is a person dead? Are they an infant? Are they a child? Are they a young adult? Or are they parents? And I think the book does a pretty good job, very simplistic, but a very good job at describing each stage. A person who isn't reconciled, doesn't know Christ, they're dead in trespasses and sins. A person who's an infant, they're a brand new babe in Christ. They need the milk of the word. They're not ready for meat yet. They need lots of attention, lots of care. There's going to be a lot of ugliness maybe from their former life before Christ that you're going to have to help them discern through. Child, you can see on page 41 through 43. If you look on page 43, there's a pretty good diagram. Julie, would you tell me some of the attributes of infant, child?
Infant
and child to start with.
Infant, the one they had, is just characterized by ignorance.
Yeah, babies
Child.
don't know much.
Yeah, and child would be
Hudson,
centeredness.
yeah.
He's out there now.
Oh, yeah.
And then, yeah, self-centeredness for a child.
Mhm.
People.
So, yeah, so you think about where a person's at spiritually, well, what's their fruit? They might just be ignorant. They just haven't been exposed to the word yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're just kind of still self-centered, like a child is, not really thinking about the bigger picture, right? What's the others?
For a young adult, you get service, focus on God-centeredness and others-centeredness.
And that's where I think a lot of people are. They stay in the young adult category. Not a negative, okay? Not a negative, but they kind of hover there for a long time. Because what's the difference between young adult and parent?
Parent then characterized by intentionality, reproducibility, and strategy.
So you have servant-hearted people, young adults, spiritually speaking, people who are active in the church, but the difference is they have not begun pouring in to the next generation or whoever God gives them as a disciple. Parents make children, young adults, not so much, okay, in this scenario, okay? I understand biology, it happens, but... so the difference being intentionality, okay? The difference being somebody who's purposed in their heart to take what they know of Jesus and to give it to somebody else. That is where a person transitions from young adult to parent. A person who says, you know what? I love my Sunday school, but there's a need. I feel just, ready by God to begin working with these young people. And you step out in faith and you stretch a little bit and you become a discipler of young people, okay? Like that's beautiful. That's a person moving from young adult into parent. You're putting somebody else's needs before your own preferences. And that's what ministry is all about, is putting others' needs before your own preferences. So to do that though, we have to have a good assessment of where a person is at head, heart, hands. What is their character? Where is their spiritual fruit? What level is their stage? Are they spiritually mature enough to handle it? Go ahead and turn the page. Chapter 4 talks about the different parts of what discipleship looks like, one-on-one, small group. I kind of talk about both of those interchangeably because I think you do a lot of the same things. Small groups, though, are just a little bit more facilitated. One-on-ones are more organic usually. Real teaching, and I put a little parentheses there. This is another place where small groups go wrong. It becomes a social club. It becomes, hey, we're going to grill out, come over, bring your kids, it's going to be a great time. Christians getting together for fellowship is amazing. Don't get me wrong. Is it discipleship? We can lose our way. The intentionality, we when it's not there, the real teaching, when that kind of goes by the wayside, because the fellowship is so important, we get out of balance, okay? And so primarily, we're talking about, I liked their word guided practice. As a school teacher, I know Darlene, guided practice. It's after you instruct, right? That's your guided practice, right? You go through and show them specifically what you're asking for, and then you have to evaluate. Are they doing what you guided? So real teaching, shepherding, a small group leader, a discipler has a shepherd's heart. They're concerned about where the person is spiritually. They're praying for that person. They're checking in on them. They're learning things about them. They're investing. Okay, you might remember from this little chart here. It's not a one and done. You might be signing up with this person for life. I always say to a person that I'm trying to disciple, and I've lost more disciples than I can count, unfortunately. They just kind of ghost me. They kind of disappear. And what I say to them, sometimes even right before I think they're going to leave and stop meeting with me or kind of ghost me, is I'm like a junkyard dog. I'll take a bite and I never let go. You're going to have to let go of me. I'm not going to let go of you. And then they let me go. So hey, it hurts. But can parents take it? Parents take the hurt. Parents know what's on the other side. And so we go through difficulty and struggle and things that are painful for the benefit of another person, even if they're ignorant of it. God knows. So you need a leader. You need an intentional leader. Small group, you as a discipler, you need to be intentional. You're creating that relational environment. You're transparent. You're developing accountability. It's not just you checking in on their accountability. They can check in on you too. Check in how you're doing. It's not just, I'm going to pray for you. No, I need prayer from you. It's that relationship. And then a reproducible process. And that's really the next set. Part 2 is how we make this into a reproducible process. Chapter 5 gives us some of that process, and then it's going to continue on from there, how each of these processes look for the different people in their walk. What does this process look like for a dead person? What does this process look for like a child or an infant? So you share, obviously, literally, you're sharing the gospel. Connect is your purposed fellowship, and I think that's a great way to make sure your small groups are purposed. Don't lose the purpose of your small group or your. I could just meet with a guy for lunch and talk about the weather or his job or whatever. I can do that, but I have to pivot. I have to make that profitable spiritually. I need to have that kind of awkward silence for a moment. I just had one. I was just with Doug training on Saturday. And it was like, I'm looking for, because we're just shooting the breeze, and then I'm like, I got to guide this. And so I just asked a question, and then it just kind of spilt out. Would it have spilt out if I hadn't punctured the balloon? No, you got to pivot. Okay, so intentional, purposed fellowship is really important. And then ministry, what you're actually doing as far as your skills, your abilities, your helps, how are you blessing? And then discipleship, literally making that person from one stage to the next. I'm going to make a dead man alive. I'm going to take a child and I'm going to make them into a young adult. I'm going to move this person to the next stage of spiritual development. They're my baby. That's my role. That's my job. Good example it gave was Philip, because we don't really know the salvation story of Philip. That we understand at some point he understood and the gospel was shared. He received it. He began in fellowship in the local church to the point where then later he was called as a deacon. He worked as a deacon until what happened next. He was called to evangelize and to minister to the Samaritans. So he's moved down to Samaria, and that's where he meets the Ethiopian eunuch. So what do you see with Philip? You see somebody coming to life, somebody integrating into that local church. They build up, they mature, they call to service as a disciple, then as a deacon, then as somebody who is in charge of souls, like Philip is. And this process hasn't changed. Okay, it's the same. So I liked page 67. If you go to page 67 really quick, there's this little anecdote at the end. This guy has been working with this person. This guy had been a bar owner. He got saved. He decides, I can't do that anymore. But he still plays music and things like that. Page 67, the guy's like kind of over his head. The man is the new disciple's asking questions he doesn't know how to answer. He goes, well, maybe I'll just have you meet my pastor and he can answer these questions for you. And the man says, you're my pastor. You're my pastor. I get my spiritual information from you. You go find out. You go study it, and then you tell me. I don't know him. And that's kind of the switch that we need to make, is that, oh boy, I wish somebody would come to church and meet my pastor and he would do a better job. Yes, but I don't have the buy-in. I'm nameless. I'm faceless to that person. They know you. So if you can get equipped to answer those questions, it's going to usually draw better than just a guy meeting me. And how many times have I heard, oh, my coworker's coming today, or so-and-so made me a promise they're coming to church, and guess what? They're never coming, okay? But you'll see them 5 times next week. And that's my point. You are their pastor. Not literally, but to a spiritually dead person, a true believing Christian, you, in their mind, you're like the Pope. You know, you're like a religious figure to them. You might be the only Christian that they know. So yeah, kind of has some self-confidence to say, I am an important person to that person in their understanding of God. I need to be heart, hands, and what's the other one? Head, heart, hands. So I'm going to take a seat. Like I said, I'm just sharing those few thoughts with you guys, and then I'll just kind of open it up. But I'm going to move this camera really quick, and hopefully somebody will break the ice. Okay, I'm just going to move this over here. All right. Oh, Julie's going to break the ice. Go grab some goodies.
That's what you meant, breaking the ice?
Yeah.
Can you awkwardly walk? Because that's all you need.
Yeah, I'd take some more.
Yep. Grab some coffee, grab some goodies.
Okay.
Alright. Now I'm going to take some notes because you guys might have some really good thoughts that I haven't had.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I got a question.
Yep.
And it's a legitimate question. Okay. Now next to Jim, and I found out that Ron is a year older than me. Okay, but I'm like number 3 here at the table. Okay, but you know what? I'm from a different generation a little bit. And see, I've always been used to going to church and singing and praying and hearing a sermon. I kind of took it from the book here that this guy, I don't think he was as complimentary
Thank you.
to church services is what I believe a church service is. You know, we come to church and we praise God with singing. We come to church and we fellowship with our believers and friends, and sometimes find out where we can help and minister to those people in the church. We hear the Word of God preached. Now maybe I'm different. You know, one of the problems I have is when I'm listening to preaching, I tend to think that they're just talking to me. And I get kind of excited about that. Sometimes not so excited, but excited. But you know, I do know that one of the way churches are going, Baptist churches are one of the only denominations now that still meet Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night. You know, and I know that small groups are kind of a thing now. That you know, they instead of having church on Sunday, they have small groups. You know, but I guess, you know, I really liked this. I really enjoyed it. I guess the one thing that I did have a little problem with, though, is I felt that there was the real church service that we have on Sunday mornings. I believe that's absolutely critical. In fact, I spend so many times, every week I go in on Thursdays and do that thing. I tell the guys, it says, you gotta get to church. You gotta get to church, because if you don't go to church, you're not gonna grow, you're not gonna survive, you're gonna sink, and you're gonna be gone. Not saying you're going to be lost, but I said you're not going to grow. And I don't know, I'm just kind of wondering how discipleship in building small groups works into what we're already doing, which I don't think we should change. And maybe it's because I'm 72 years old. Okay, you know, do you understand what I'm
Great
asking?
question. Yeah. Yeah. Who's got some thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Dale.
I wasn't gonna say anything, but I probably will now. I agree with Bob probably, and I don't wanna say but, cause that kinda takes away the fact, anytime you say that, it means, no, I don't really agree with him. But my point is
Did he
in
say
agreement with Bob, is that Christ died for the church. Christ died for the church. He said that he would build his church upon this rock, and the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against it. I think anything we do for discipling has got to point people to Christ and point Christians to the church. And I think, I think that's a concern, you know, with small groups. And if small groups can be a tool to disciple, because I mean, we're not called to a small group, we're called to church and we're called to disciple, but if it's a tool, and I think that's where can be value is in building disciples that build a church, that build disciples that build the church.
It's multiplication.
Yeah.
Sure.
Is that, so see, Bob, I didn't disagree with you.
No, I understand, Dale, you know, you gotta understand, you know, I spend a lot of my week doing just that, you know.
Right,
And
exactly.
I really do, and it's frustrating, you know, because you tell them, you know, you talk to them, and then you tell them, you know, and they all write prayer cards that I get and read them and stuff like that. But there's an old saying, you know, it says they find Jesus in jail, but when they get out, they leave him there. And that's what you find so much, you know, you find so much. But I don't think it's a waste of time, because my feeling is if I can find one grant, you know, then my 18 years of doing this has been worth it.
Other thoughts on what Bob and Dale have been talking about? Yeah, go ahead. Dan.
So many people think the church is this building here. This isn't the church. The church is the group that meets, whether it's here or wherever.
Right.
But there's rule and order in a church, no matter where it is. You know, it's you know, there's a hierarchy of how it's run, you know, no matter where it is, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
I was on our trip, one of our trips, I was listening to a preacher on the radio, and he was talking about church, and I thought what he said was really good. He said the devil likes to get us isolated. You know, we can worship God out in nature. We should, but you know, if I'm out in nature, then I can be alone with God. I don't need to be in church to worship God. Absolutely you don't. But he gets us isolated from other people, so we're an army of one instead of surrounded by the body of Christ. And he said that's why church is so important, is because you're with a body of believers. You're with a group of warriors. You know, you should all have the armor of God on to go fight the battle. I thought that was really good. The one thing I want to say about this book is I really appreciated how he always pointed us to Christ as the example, to Jesus Christ as he was walking along with the disciples and discipling his disciples, which sounds a little funny, but he just did a very good job of saying this is what Jesus Christ did when he was discipling his people. I thought that was very good, because that's ultimately the example we should follow.
You know, I've always been really big on relationships. I agree. That's my favorite thing. And you know, when you go to the jail, you know, you work with like 12 guys on Thursdays in a room. But it's when you go one-on-one with them on Tuesday mornings is when you really make progress, when you're one-on-one.
Remember you said that.
Yeah, I know. The one thing I don't like is ever since the COVID, you have to talk on a phone through a glass, and I hate that. Every once in a while you get pulled in there, and you get to sit next to them like this and talk to them, and it's way different. You know, but I told you guys the story about all the old ladies that come to church, and they
Terrified you?
Yeah, they terrified me. I walked through this gauntlet of ladies after church, and they were all older ladies, and their hair was gray and pulled up in a bun like that. And I walked out of church, and they were shaking me like this. I said, "Are you saved? Are you saved? Are you saved?" I was gone, and they never saw me for another 20 years. You know, but I really believe that, you know, really, I don't know if I'd say it's the first step, but it's a critical step, is you got to learn to be their friend. You know, you got to learn that they need to trust you, what you're saying, and they need to see your life and the example you set, but you got to sacrifice for them along the way and let them know. You know, you got to, in fact, you know, when I go to jail now, I started doing this area. Andy would go real good with me now, but I wear an orange when I go in. Okay, and the reason is because I don't want them to think that I think I'm better than they are. You know,
They're gonna lock you up.
Pardon me?
They're gonna lock you up.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, last week, Amanda brought in this young guy, he was a Muslim guy. And he told me he wanted to see a pastor, and I said, well, I'm as close as you'll get. You know, and he came in there and he told me that he believes in Jesus and stuff, and then a little later he asked me, who is Jesus? And he asked, I meant when you talk about Jesus, you're gonna say the word salvation. So then he asked what salvation is, but I know when Amanda said, Bob, he says, you know, he's not quite working all the way here. And I told her, I said, well, I'm the perfect guy for him then, because, you know, that's why I work too, you know. But no, but I believe that friendships and relationships is really, really, really key. And one thing Angie said too that I really like too, and Angie, I've always kind of thought this too, you know, we see Jesus and a lot of times we talk, you know, he's healing people and he's scolding James and John for arguing who's going to sit next to him in heaven and stuff like that. But, you know, I picture him too as walking down the road together and teasing Thomas because he was bald and laughing and stuff like that too, you know, that's a part of it. You know, humor and stuff is a part of this discipleship and in relationship and stuff like that, you know, but I really think that that's where you need to start it is building a relationship with these people.
Yeah.
I really do.
Well, that's what Jesus did with his disciples.
Yeah, yeah.
He built his relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's let some other people, I don't want to monopolize just with a couple of people. I want more input from people who are quiet. I'm looking at the young lady over there. No, on this topic, other things, you know, first thoughts that, you know, that Bob's talked about, that Dale and Angie have mentioned.
Well, I think that, you know, he makes a good point. I think the challenge for, say, confronting the typical church is that most have the idea that this is the pastor's job, or this is the job of the service. They get everything they want. You know, this is professional work. You gotta go be a Bible college student, a seminary student, whatever to do. And I guess going along with what's already been said, I think that the discipleship is an everyman responsibility, and it's a complement to the church. It's not a replacement for it, because I think that sometimes a little bit of say, clout can go to someone's head, and I think there are some small groups become kind of mini churches. This guy becomes the pastor of this small group, and something happens. If he's unhappy with the church, pretty soon he pulls the whole group out and they go off and become their own church.
That's what happened.
And you know, that's happened a lot of times. So I know a number of churches, a number of pastors that I've known over the years are gun shy when people start saying we don't have small group, because it ends up kind of dividing the local body rather than uniting. Mm-hmm. But I think that if the point that we understand in this is that it's not that we all get to have our own little congregation. It's that really it's just the challenge that we need to be aware of the souls that God has put us in contact with to reach them, and in those relationships and in the teaching and so on. I think it's much more individual than just having my own little congregation off to the side here and there. And that when we are bringing them to church, but that you may be kind of their contact person for church.
You're kind of their anchor when they
They come to church, it's like,
where are they
hey, the
laying?
pastor was saying this, what are they doing up there? That you become kind of, that you, for some people, they've never been to church, they don't know anything about church, certainly they don't know anything about a Baptist church. And then it's like, so you are kind of their translator.
If you've ever been in a foreign country, how close do you hold on to your translator like you don't want to go anywhere without him?
Yeah.
So I think what I'm seeing so far here is just really developing the mindset that we are all really ambassadors for Christ, but not to pull people to our own congregation, but that we are a complement. We are the outreach of the church. It's not the program, it's the people. And the hard part is saying, how do I get, I know that in philosophy, it's how do I get there?
I think part of, Bob's question initially about the book, because the book is a book about discipleship. It's not talking a lot about its corporate part. This is a very successful, very large corporate body, several thousand people. The authors have multiple campuses, so they're definitely a lot of local church. It's a book about discipleship, though, so it's going to emphasize that part of their program, which they have hundreds of small groups and are planting churches and things like that through those small groups. And so I would say that's why you don't hear a lot about the corporate part from this book. Just it's trying to keep in its lane and can't talk about everything. I think it does down the road talk more about how to integrate people into that, and I think that's more about that maturation process. So right now it's focusing on, as Pastor Gray was just saying, we understand this philosophically. How do we put hands and feet to it? How do we make it? How do we get there? One thing, a concern, and this is a concern. I was actually, during the annual meeting, the guy who was preaching, we had a little breakout, and the pastor right next to me had small groups blow up, split the church. Right, I mean, just right there. And he was just like, I hear what he's saying, but I do not agree. And that was Pastor Terpstra's nephew. Talking. That's in the ministry. Yeah, he had some people pull away. And actually, I was in the same row as Mrs. Terpstra and Pastor, and they were both like, "Ooh, this is new. You know, this is we understand it, but there's a powder cake because it pulls people away from the body. It has not necessarily pulls them away, but it has ministry operation outside of designated hours and outside of the building. And because we're used to ministry in the building, it is where this can be done safely and under supervision. Once it's out there, is it the Wild West? Does it become unmanageable? That's kind of the fear, and it's a fear that has been, definitely experienced and has blown up. So I at this point have no intentions of closing something to open something new. Because, and this is where I've struggled personally with small groups, is where do we fit it in? Because we have Sunday school, like a small group. We have our kids program in like a small group. I mean, if all these are kind of small groups, these little ministries. But do I shut down a Sunday night that's being well attended compared to, especially many churches, COVID killed their Sunday night. There's no more Sunday night. Do I shut that down for small groups and then only half the amount of people who would have come?
That's my question.
I absolutely, and that I have the same fear, and that's why I've been really hesitant to pull any trigger. Speaking about Wednesday, well, what about doing things on Wednesday? Well, the issue is you're pulling people out of prayer meeting. This is why one of the reasons why we don't have kids meeting on Wednesdays, because we don't want to pull workers and kids out of prayer meeting. I get it. So then are we asking people for a third night of their week to come and do small groups? And I think that's asking a lot from a lot of people, especially if they don't know the Lord. This is not a priority. People are so busy. I don't have that part of it. My emphasis is more the one-on-one, looking for those opportunities versus developing a small group ministry. I think this information is applicable to both of those. They can help you develop small group, they can help you develop intentionality with your discipleship. That's why I like it. It can kind of work in both ways. If, and I say if, there was ever a time, I would say, if it came down to it, you close down Sunday night service, you offer small groups that night. I would maybe even still do a service for people who like going to church on Sunday night. But allow people to attend a small group, either Sunday night, or if Tuesday night works better and they don't, Sunday night, they need to get ready for work on Monday. They don't do anything spiritually speaking Sunday night necessarily, but they do a small group on Thursday night. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. You know, I haven't discussed that with our deacons. I don't know if that's the direction our church wants to take, but that's the only way I could see that working, a small group ministry working. Again, why would I kill something that people are attending?
You know, the people that are teaching or leading the discipleship group, they also need to be discipled and taught also. I mean, they need to be in church also.
And there would be accountability, and that's a good point. Part of this process is if I develop a disciple-making culture and I have people designated as kind of disciple makers in the church, there's going to be accountability to that, to their small groups, whatever it is. There has to be oversight of that. There has to be management of it. It's not just a free-for-all.
You know, Pastor, would you be hands-on? I mean, in all this, I mean, see, I try, even at the jail, guys you don't even know, I try to tell you what's going on, and I want you to be in the loop.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, you would.
They have this map during this annual meeting. They had a map of how they do that. So they kind of have a couple of their small groups, a couple of their disciples, and they know, oh, I know John is right now working with this 17-year-old guy who came to church the one time, and he's taking him out to lunch and he's teaching him the gospel. They have that on a map. They know exactly who's doing what. And then there's, like I said, like accountability. There's conversations about, well, how's that going with him? Tell me what he's asking. Do you feel equipped to answer those kinds of questions? And so what can I do to help you minister to that person? So yeah, that becomes, and that's pastorally, that's what my Sunday preparation, that's what that becomes, is small group management. So it's not like I'm getting a night off. I'm actually increasing the amount of accountability that I'm giving to other people. That's what that can look like. Angie?
One more thought.
Yeah.
So I realize we're talking a lot about small groups, but another thing that they do a lot of in this book is compare it to a family. You know, you have your baby, your child, your young adult, or your teenager, your young adult. I would say discipleship is a lot like raising kids, a lot like having a family. You have your child, and it doesn't have to be in a small group. It can be like just 2 or 3 people that you have over.
Right.
So.
And I think Caitlin and Megan, you might be involved with it too. You want to talk a little bit about what, let's say, why can't I think of their name? Sammy and, yeah, what are they doing? Thank you.
So,
What are they doing through First?
So on Thursday nights, they just open up their house to young adults. They have a couple people with babies. They provide supper, and we gather around and have a lovely fellowship most of the time. Like, the guys have been going out and sitting around a fire and talking forever, and us girls will sit around, drink tea, and hold babies. It's like the best.
So, and right at this point, we don't really have something like that that would be a good landing place for young adults through the ministries of our church. But if I had a young married couple or whatever who said, hey, you know, I've got a house, I've got, you know, Sunday evening free, I could, or Monday night free, or whatever it is, and be able to offer to develop something like that.
We did that in Calvary.
You did? Yep,
We
I
had
remember.
the kids that were your age, we did that.
All summer long, right?
All year long. Yeah.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we did, the whole time I was there, I taught that class.
Yeah.
We've had them on the farm quite a bit. No, that summer thing is something different, that's all
Oh,
different.
sure.
Yeah.
So, but for it to be through the church as a ministry of the church, then there's going to be oversight and accountability. There's going to be training. There's going to be, you know, more hands on that versus, hey, you're a believer that wants to lead a Bible study with somebody. I'm not going to necessarily. I'm going to try to encourage you and try to give you any support that I can. But let's say on a Sunday night, let's say we don't do an evening service. I still do a service. But I understand other people might have a small group on Thursday night that they go to, so they don't come on Sunday night. But okay, if that goes that way, if we ever looked at something like that, part of the issue is the assumption in the negative that if they're not here in the building, they're not doing things spiritually. They're just using the time for themselves. They're just saying that they're gonna do a small group and they don't. And you know what? That's between them and the Lord. You know, I'm not going to be that person's Holy Spirit. What it does offer is people come to the service if they want to go to a church service, but how many more people who are not in church might come to a small group who have not yet come to the church? Are we expanding into the community in a way where our Sunday nights doesn't? It's very our focus is inward with that kind of service versus an outward. So this becomes evangelistic. This discipleship becomes an outreach. So it's hard to do.
I was just gonna mention early in our marriage, you have been meeting, you and a couple of guys have been meeting with some guys in the community who are not believers, and they asked the pastor about having a small group, and he said, absolutely, so long as it happens at church during Sunday school. Do you remember that?
Yeah, okay, so that.
And he was like, but they're not going to come, and they're partiers, they're not gonna like come on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. to a church building. They wanted to go out and do something in the community during regular waking hours for most people. And he said, yeah, small group in church Sunday school. And then we lost those people.
I had a group that comes over to my shop, but when they found out I stood the Lord, that come to a kind of a screeching halt.
Yeah.
And so now they only come around when they want something, they need something fixed. And they still come around once in a while. But I'd like to find a crucifix I can put above my window, so they walk in, it's the first thing they see. Then maybe they'll pick up the conversation with me again.
Yeah.
And, you know, another way too, and this is kind of a weakness of our church, I think, having people who work for church Sunday after church for dinner, and new people to come. You know, you've talked a little bit about a hospitality committee, but that is a way of discipling too. It's kind of getting your foot in the door. A new person comes in. I remember the first time I went to church here, I had no plans of doing anything after church except for getting home back in Washington. This guy came up to me, I never knew who he was. He says, the dinner's on. He says, well, we've got three plates set. And I said, well, I got 4 of us, and he said, no problem, 4. And we went over there and stuff, But that's a step in the right direction too. But the weakness I was going to say is that Darlene and I have a little bit. I think probably Dale and Angie probably have this problem too, and many others. You guys probably have too. You get out of church and you get home at 1:30 or so, maybe like that. Now we take a nap on Sunday afternoons. And I lay down, and before I get to sleep, all of a sudden she's yelled at me, throwing my clothes at me, says, you got 15 minutes to get ready to go. We got to get back to church because truthful kids, or what they call it, is going on. The time between is really tough sometimes.
We have a packed Sunday.
Yeah, we do. And we've had people over before, and one time they came and they stayed the whole time. I had to go out and milk the cows. I came back in, I had to try to get in the bathroom, and they were getting ready to go to church and then shower and get clothes on and stuff like that, and they stayed the whole day. And that was really tough. Really tough. So I have to admit that ever since, and we've tried to be careful about how we handle that, because Sundays are very full.
Yeah.
You're right. Darlene, okay.
Oh, sorry, Dale, that was.
And I don't want to monopolize conversation, but I'm listening and thinking and processing a little bit. I think maybe we're missing a point here tonight, that we're not going to restructure our church right now, but the purpose is to be better disciples, so that we mature to the point where we're good disciplers.
Right.
And whether that's with one person or 3 people, or someday God gives us a dozen. Maybe we, if everybody in here had one person.
Yeah.
One person.
I like that. It's follow one. How does that go? Follow after one, and then win one, and then lead one, I think is what it is. So like the idea is that you're following after somebody's following after you, and you're leading them. I think, Dale, you're absolutely right. We're not here to get into the weeds of, what that, I was just asked, what could that look like? And this is the only way I could see it working. But the intention is that we're becoming more comfortable in having conversations about discipleship. This group is working through materials on discipleship. The next stage of this is how do you minister to people in each stage of their spiritual maturation? How do you deal with an infant? How do you deal with a child? How do you take them from where they're at and then bring them up to the next level? I think one of the very positive things of our church is that there's a lot of people who have a lot of Bible knowledge. It's getting that knowledge out of them to somebody who is looking to develop and grow. Connecting those dots, empowering people to see that Jesus wants them to be a discipler. That's what I need to do a better job of as a pastor. I want everyone to walk away from this book and the next workbook to come. I want every person to be able to walk away from this saying, I can do that. Even if I don't have a theological degree, I can do this. And then I'm going to experiment. I'm going to find somebody and I'm going to get going on it. And I'm going to have a guinea pig. And,
Don't say guinea pig.
But in all reality, I'm going to put hands and feet to what I want to do. And I swear to you, if you start praying about God giving you somebody that you can minister to, somebody that you can start working with, a disciple, the Lord will give you, the fields are white for harvest. There are people out there. Now, sometimes Satan plucks that person right away. Sometimes they ghost you, whatever it is. But I've been amazed in 4 years here how many people in a very short amount of time, it's like Bob at the jail, they're kind of a snapshot sometimes, but you can say confidently that you gave that person Jesus Christ. Well, you had them in your sphere of influence. You did what you could with them. I want everybody to be able to go before the Lord and say, I did too. I was able to do that. You gave me that person for 4 weeks, and then they ghosted me. Well, what did I do with them for those 4 weeks? So, does anyone have anything else? I don't want this to go so long as that we start looking cross-eyed at each other. And anyone have any final thoughts?
It's just
Yeah.
one thought in general. He starts off the book talking about that some people just go to church because that's what you're supposed to do. And I think that having a program, thinking of the program, we feel like we're spiritual because we did it. When we may not have a disciple. I guess this is my take on it. This is an individual process. The Lord puts people in our sphere, we disciple them. It may or may not happen as in connection with a church service or a day of the week. They're available at 5 a.m. on a Thursday. Yeah. This person's available. I know people who do Bible study before the guy goes to work. There's someone else who does it at supper time. It's like you can't put everyone in the one little niche. It's like, if you're working with an individual relationship, you work out when you can work it out. But if we make it a program, okay, you're all expected to do it. Where's your person? Where's your time? I think you either feel super spiritual because you did it, or you feel like I'm pressed into a mold and I'm never going to fit. And you can get frustrated either way, but I think that the end goal is, are we endeavoring to make a disciple individually? Who is the Lord put in your life, and what can you do with them? Now, there may be someone else says, I can only take them so far. Here, Pastor Greg, can you do a little study with them, or join us, or something? That's one thing. But as far as to necessarily make it kind of our own little mini church, I don't think that's the point. We're trying to take our friends, our contacts, learn to share the gospel, be more intentional, take them how far we can, and eventually it's going to lead to church. Maybe right away, but maybe not. And, you know, I've had some people in my church where I had Bible study with them for years, and it still never really went anywhere. And some that they really grew, but there's still a long way to go. You know, they text me at 6 in the morning or at midnight or whatever, depending on the person, and say, hey, I was watching TV, and you know, there's pornography and and can you pray for me right now? I think this is more the relationship part that you're building up with someone so that they can talk to you, not as the leader of a church group, but as a friend who knows God.
That's that relational environment,
Relationship.
shepherding,
We're
accountability.
creating that.
Sometimes I
And so-
do one-on-ones, Greg, and I don't even talk about church.
Right, yeah.
I talk about cows. There's one guy there who's a farmer. We talk about cows for sometimes 45 minutes. I always try to end
What's
up.
your intention?
Yeah, but yeah, I'm trying.
Eventually,
Yeah. You know, one weakness that the church has, and this relates to jail. You know, these guys get out, you know, I tell them, I says, if you study this, I think you're gonna end up about where I'm at, you know, as far as what I believe. You know, and I believe a person really needs, I don't believe a person can really worship so well up in the mountain. I don't. Actually, Darlene told me about a sermon Greg did when you were on vacation, where he said a person who kind of isolates themselves ends up being pretty odd after a while. You know? In fact, we got a letter from her sister today that show you how odd you can be because she doesn't go to church. Okay, but she's a Christian, and God talks to her, physically talks to her and stuff, and she sees visions and stuff. You know, but the guys, when they get out of jail, you know, you tell them to go to church, but see, idle time is bad time for these people. You know, and you say you need to go to church, but see, we come on Sunday and we come maybe on Wednesday night, and what do you do the rest of the time? You know, what do you do the rest of the time? You know, and you need to fill their day and their time and stuff with God things. Otherwise, they do fall away. They disappear. And, you know, I don't know what the answer to all that is, because, you know, you can't give 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to one guy all the time. You know, I got a wife I'd like to visit with once in a while. But, you know, I just, well, the thing I'm kind of emphasizing, I really think it needs to be very church-centered, the whole thing, very church-centered.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to share? I guess,
I've had a few of them tell me, they ain't going to church because that's all they want is money. And that's what I love about this church, is that you don't hear it.
Yeah.
And I think the first people that come to church, that's the first thing we hear. Are they coming back again?
I think that's an excuse for people not wanting to come, you know.
I think so
Can
too.
be,
Yeah, because I haven't heard many churches sitting there pounding away for money.
You probably attended better churches.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Most pastors are not liking to do that.
Yeah, my denominationally kind of changes. So, some homework, so we'll try to probably meet in another month. It might be a little bit, month a week, month to 2 weeks, something like that. Holiday season's upon us, so we'll work something out. Do you like Monday night, or do you think Sunday after service would be better? Dale's saying no, Sunday's already packed to the gills, so maybe continue looking for a night of the week. Do me a favor. I want you to be completely transparent when it comes to chapter 3, dead, infant, child, young adult, parents. I don't want you to say this to me. I want you to, before God, seek wisdom on where do you think you actually are? Where would you categorize yourself? I did this, and I would say I should be a parent, but I'm probably more of a young adult. And you might go, but you're a pastor. You're ministering and discipling and evangelizing all the time. And part of my desire to do this program is to develop more from young adult to a person that is reproducing. Okay, we can, as a pastor, I can say all day, I'm busy, and I preach the word, and I minister to hurts, and I talk to people, and yada yada yada. Am I reproducing? If I said in 4 years I have solidly found somebody, brought them to Christ, and then I have discipled them and they are now in the child to young adult stage at this point, how many of those do I have? In 4 years. I'm being honest, and that's not like, to me, am I edifying the saints? Yeah, I mean, I can check other boxes. Can I check this box? And if I can't check this box, then what am I doing? You know, and it doesn't mean the other stuff's not important. What it means is I need to make sure I'm placing energy into reproduction, into parenting people through these different stages. Yeah, I can say I met that person 4 years ago and I've seen their the tremendous growth spiritually in them. But I'm saying from dead to life to functional Christian, I need more of that. And that's where I want to get more of that. So what I want you to do is...
Pastor, can I say one thing about what you just said?
Yeah.
One thing I've kind of learned, though, we want to see the results right now. You know, we do. I know sometimes pastors will start in a church and they say, well, I expect 10% growth every year or something like that. Yeah. But, this is the kind of example, when I hurt my knee, all of a sudden we got this email or something like that from this lady that I used to know very well back in Cedar Woolley, and her son wanted to talk to me. His name was Ernie. And I didn't even know Ernie. He was a little guy. He was not up in the age group yet of what I was working with and stuff. But he called me. He's a Marine. His name is Assault Dog now. But he called me and we talked about 40 minutes. And he told me, he said, Bob, he says, you don't know how much of an influence you had on my life. I didn't even work with the kid, but he was sitting there watching him. There's so many things. I'm sure that Greg probably gets these things too. And there's so much more that happens that we don't see.
It's true.
That yet we've planted. So when you say, well, I've only led one person to the Lord, you might be very surprised at how many that you influenced to get to the Lord. And I think that's sort of an idea of this too. We might not see the rewards.
No.
But
what I guess where my heart is the reproducible process.
mm-hmm.
The intentionality is there, but what is my system? My personal, how do I disciple somebody? How do I move them from each stage? I think I do too much friendship and not enough evangelism. I don't pivot as much as I can and should. There's things that I know, and I'm being very critical on myself because that's how I make changes for, I feel, what's best. So I hear what you're saying and I agree. I'm not looking at it as a negative. I'm giving myself some constructive criticism to areas of deficit that I feel I have. I know my own heart still has fear to pivot. I can shoot, the gospel all day long at certain people, and like in jail.